editor Richard Lambert is a former Bank of England policymaker. He spent 10 years as editor of the Financial Times, and he is now director of the Confederation of British Industry. He joins us ahead of a keynote speech on British banking. Welcome this morning.
Thank you.
If I can begin by talking a little bit about what happened over the weekend. Are you concerned that the kind of global consensus that we had post-Lehman Brothers seems to be dissipating a little bit? How dangerous is that?
Yes, it is a matter of real concern. Now, the mood music ahead of the weekend was pretty bad. So it would have been surprising, given, for example, the position that China had been taking in the previous weeks, if they had suddenly pulled a rabbit out of the hat and come to kind of some sense of harmony. But that clearly didn't happen. And the worry really now is that the sort of intensity of international collaboration when we were really close to the fire is dissipating as we move away from it, and that's going to make further necessary kind of cooperation, especially at the G-20, harder to achieve. So I guess the weekend's outcome is not great for Seoul next month.
Indeed. We also heard some of the leading bankers talking about concerns that there would be more regulation, apart from Basel III, put in individually in countries. Looking at Britain in particular, with the current mood music, as you just said, from the coalition government, how concerned are you that that is actually going to affect the competitiveness of British banking?
Well, I think that what was being discussed over the weekend was whether Basel was going to crimp global growth.
Yeah.
And there are lots of analysis on either side. I mean, the bankers say it is. The Bank for International Settlement has produced pages of economic trick analysis to say it won't. I think what bankers need is a sense of direction, a degree of certainty, where they've got to get to, and a bit of time to get there. That's the key thing, and I think that applies to the UK as much as anywhere else in Europe.
Now, Vince Cale's been talking about kind of shining a harsh light into the financial industry. How helpful do you think phrases like that are? And indeed, the chat that we've had from George Osborne as well about increasing levies at a time when the British banking industry is obviously having to recapitalise itself.
Well, I think, obviously, I believe it's unhelpful. Because where we've been through in the banking sector, it's not just a sort of crisis of a balance sheet crisis, it's a crisis of trust. And trust in the banking system feeds through to the way the economy works and everything that follows from that. So I think if politicians go around using kind of violent language, that makes the job harder. Now, clearly the banks have got a lot to do. They've come from a bad place, and they're not in a safe place yet. But politicians and policymakers and regulators all have responsibility as well. It's not just an issue for the bankers, this.
You talk a little bit about trust there, but for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and even for bigger businesses, they find that trust has really been jarred, and they're still finding it difficult to lend, and to lend at the kind of rates they need to be competitive.
That's correct, and that's the damage that's being caused by this terrific credit shock. You know, in the winter of 2008-9, banks were close to the precipice, and relationships that went back over decades were kind of dropped as banks did whatever it took to stop their losses and rebuild their capital. But
should George Osborne, therefore, put on an extra levy on banks to kind of try and force them to lend?
Well, what he should ask himself is who's going to pay for the levy? If they raise a thumping great tax on the banking sector, who does he think is going to pay for it? Is it going to be the traders in the city? Maybe a tiny little bit. Actually, the tax will fall through on the customers of the banks. And you know, the Bank of England last financial stability review said 10 billion off the bottom line was 50 billion off lending to industry. So that's where the price would be paid of a thumping great extra tax.
So basically they cannot legislate to bring down bankers' bonuses?
They can. My view is that they should regulate the form which bankers' bonuses take. But I think it's really a mistake if politicians start to try and intervene in the actual level of pays, if you see what I mean. They have an interest in the structure of the pay. We have an interest in the structure of the pay because you know, the risk falls through on us as taxpayers.
Sure.
But if we start to mess around with the actual level, then you get into real trouble.
Now, we've got Philip Green's report coming out today. It's probably not surprising to many of us to realise that he thinks that it's fairly ineptly run. Can business teach government much about how to run it more effectively and efficiently?
I think business needs to be a little bit careful because it's a kind of different sort of, you know, if Philip Green says jump, everybody in his empire jumps 2 feet in the air. It's not the way in the public service. But it's clear that the the UK government spends about 150 billion a year on procurement, and it does it through different channels. Some pay, $200 for a set of paper clips. Some pay $2. What the government is now doing, actually forced by these crises it's now in, is consolidating the purchasing of these commodity indices, which I'm sure is what Sir Philip is going to urge them to do. So they're on the way.
Now, you, I know, have been talking about areas for growth. After all these cuts, we need to look at growth. And one of the areas that's very important is education. What do you think of this idea that tuition fees would be raised even higher for British students going to university?
Well, I think that it's clear that public funding for universities is going to be cut for teaching quite significantly. And so private capital, private money has to be got into the system. Universities are a private good. I mean, students who go to universities get economic benefit from their degrees, but they're also a public good because they create the kind of society we all want to live in. So I think the balance needs to be got really carefully. I'm worried, frankly, at some of the numbers that have appeared in the papers over the last couple of days about how high the cap might go or might be removed altogether. That makes me think. That makes me worried. And
finally, just before we go, you're almost finished in this current role. High Commissioner of India, is that possibly next?
Complete and utter nonsense. It was in a paper which normally is 100% accurate, but on this occasion it was wrong.
Can't believe that could possibly be true. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Thank you.